Hello everybody. So as of recording this video, Russia has invaded the Ukraine. It's a full-scale invasion. I think it's a lot larger than anyone expected. It's unclear what their goal is, if they're going to try to install a pro-Russian regime, just take the Donbass, maybe take the eastern Ukraine or take a strip of territory to connect Crimea. Nobody really knows at the moment what exactly is happening or gonna happen. For the purposes of this video, though, it doesn't matter if Russia takes no land or the entirety of the Ukraine. We're going to try and talk about kind of the long-term political, economic consequences of this. So the West has said they're not going to get involved directly. They're not going to intervene directly. They're not going to send in armed forces to support the Ukraine. What they're going to do is launch massive sanctions against Russia, following up the previous massive sanctions against Russia, which didn't really seem to work. So let's just think about this for a minute. What are these sanctions going to do in the short and medium term? And I think part of the question we have to think about is, who is more dependent upon the other, Russia or the EU? Now, a larger portion of Russia's total economic exports and imports, from my understanding, comes from the EU. But the question is, what are they exporting and what are they importing? Now, what I was able to look up is the EU gets roughly 20 to 25% of its petroleum and 40% of its natural gas from Russia. I'm not sure if it's higher or lower than that, if it depends. I don't know if any of that remaining 75-80% comes through Russia, pipelines or otherwise transported through it, but isn't directly purchased. So the impact of these sanctions, if it impacts oil, which it kind of has to because that's Russia's main export, that I guess raw materials, weapons, and probably some industrial products. So in order to blow out Russia, the EU is going to cut off their biggest supply of oil and gas. So even assuming that they can get it elsewhere, and I mean, who knows if they can get if they can just replace 40% of their natural gas in any sort of efficient amount of time, the price of that is going to skyrocket. There's going to be shortages. There's not going to be enough to go around. Fortunately for them, it's the end of February now, so it's towards the end of the winter. If this had have happened back in November, the situation would be a lot more dire. But even then, I'm sure natural gas is used for a lot of things other than just heat, like electricity and stuff like that. And they're going to be fucked because they aren't going to have that. So that's immediately going to go dramatically up in value. Unless they just want to have fake sanctions and not sanction Russia's main export, which will just make the thing even more of a joke. And then they're going to lose all that petroleum. And losing that petroleum, I mean, petroleum's used for all kinds of stuff beyond just fuel, plastic, chemicals, fertilizer. So 25% of probably the most single important material in a modern economy, aside from maybe just pure electricity, is going to disappear overnight. And they're going to have to make that up. So I guess they can buy it from elsewhere, from like Venezuela or the Middle East or, I don't know, somewhere else. The issue with that, though, is I don't think it's going to be as easy to import as a pipeline across Russia is. I don't know, they're going to have to bring it in by ship or train or something. I don't even know how they'd bring it in, maybe through Turkey. I don't know if there's a pipeline through Turkey, but it's going to be harder to bring in. And that gas is going to be a lot more expensive. The price of oil has skyrocketed in the last couple days. So the EU is suffering a local shortage. Globally, if they want to buy oil elsewhere, it's going to be expensive as fuck. And they're going to have to spend a lot more money in transit costs. So that's just going to affect everything. Energy prices are going to skyrocket. Fortunately, the EU has been, from my understanding, moving away from nuclear power, so that can't take its place. I'm guessing all those solar panels are going to replace all that electricity basically overnight. So the EU is going to have to go through this process of like dramatically reconfiguring its energy economy overnight. And if they don't get this shit figured out by next winter, they're going to have to go through the whole winter with 40% less natural gas than they normally have. And I guess they could try switching over to electric heating, but could they realistically do that in a year? And where would they get the power for that if they don't have natural gas or oil? I guess they could try to build new nuclear plants or get it from somewhere else. I mean, I don't really get like what the EU thinks how this is gonna be a win for them. So then there's the other side of the coin. So that's the EU side. In the short term, it's going to be a mess. I don't know about the medium term if they'll be able to find a replacement for Russian energy. So here's the question of Russia, because Russia, it's like what, 30% of its trade or something is just going to be cut off. So what will Russia do? Now, I'm not entirely sure what Russia imports from the EU. I would imagine it's finished products and high-tech goods and stuff like microchips and that sort of thing. Russia has heavy industry. I don't think its high-tech precision industry is nearly as developed as Europe and America and Japan. I could be wrong though, so don't get angry if I am wrong about that. But I looked it up, and in 2014, Russia banned food imports from the EU. So when it comes to food, fuel, and raw materials, Russia is already self-sufficient, or it gets it from non-EU markets. So it's not going to starve, they're not going to go cold, and they're not going to be able to run their economy at the most fundamental level. I don't know if the EU imports wheat from Russia. Their wheat supplies from the Ukraine are going to get completely fucked by this. So food prices are going to go up in the EU, but Russia doesn't really seem to have that problem. They will, however, suffer from having all this money, all these businesses that are dependent upon exports basically go under, have shortages of all kinds of stuff. So in the short term, it's going to be bad for Russia, but not, I think, as devastating as it will be for the EU. Now, the EU is a lot wealthier than Russia, so they might be able to weather it better, but I don't think either side's really going to be in a good state. In the medium term, I think more than just about any other country on Earth, aside from maybe Canada, Australia, America, I don't know, maybe France. Well, France doesn't have oil, but there's not that many countries that I think could be self-sufficient if they wanted to be. Well, I guess France could be self-sufficient in terms of food. But Russia, I think, could, because it largely was during the Cold War. So Russia has its own industry, it has its own gas, it has its own water, it has its own food. It can produce most of the essential things domestically, so it can become autarkic for longer than I think the EU can. Now that brings with it a host of other problems. A lot of people, particularly of a nationalist or fascist persuasion, but even a lot of socialists, think an autarkic economy, that is an economy that does not participate meaningfully in international trade, is a good idea. Historically, it doesn't work very well for a number of reasons. The first one is without foreign competition, a lot of domestic industries get complacent. It's very easy for them to buy out their competitors or produce low quality goods at high prices because there's not really an external force. Regulatory capture is also easier than it is when you have foreign firms. So you can get like the one car producer to maybe the president of it runs for office, and then they pass laws that allow that one company to have an absolute advantage, and then they just monopolize the whole car industry. There's a lot of industries you just can't do in certain locations. Like, does everyone remember when the Soviet Union destroyed the Aral Sea in pursuit of producing its own cotton? And I mean, like, you can't really grow bananas in Canada. I'm sure you can with some expensive subsidy greenhouse scheme, but it's easier to just buy them from somewhere else. Countries just have a natural comparative or absolute advantage on a lot of goods and services, and it often is more efficient. That's not to say there's anything wrong with tariffs, but there's a difference between having tariffs to help give your domestic industry a chance to develop, to give it a fighting chance, and maybe to preserve some critical strategic sectors like weapons or energy or medical care, and having your entire economy just behind an impenetrable wall. So Russia is going to have to go through that. Now, they've largely kind of been similar to that anyway since the Soviet era, but living conditions will probably get worse in Russia. They'll start having shortages again and stuff like that. So it's really a question of who can hold out longer in this game of geopolitical, economic chicken. Is the EU going to have to give up because they're out of energy and prices of everything are skyrocketing? Or is Russia's dramatic shift in where they're buying and selling things from gonna do that first? I mean, Russia can obviously buy and sell from China instead, but China will probably demand something just as high as whatever the EU would demand from them. China is not exactly a nice master to have, or someone you should be indebted to. So I think the scenario is just going to be bad for both sides. I honestly don't know who is going to blink first. Both sides, I think, as with the Cold War, see this as a deterministic struggle. I think maybe Russia's betting that Western economies are so battered from COVID and there's such a supply shortage and stuff like that, that this will be the straw that breaks the camel's back, and they'll have no choice but to back down on the sanctions because the energy prices will just make inflation that much worse. But Russia might actually make up some of that trade with high oil prices elsewhere. You might get a scenario where they start selling it to a third party. I don't know who a third party would be in this case. Well, I guess to China, and then China sells it. And they make more money than they're making now by virtue of overall oil prices being higher. So that's kind of my analysis of the situation. That's what I think is going on and what's going to happen. So hopefully you found that interesting. Talk to you guys later.